Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Welcome to the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci.
And I'm your other host, Sarah.
So, should we at least talk about what life and happiness will be about?
Well, yes, so this is our first episode, and life and happiness could be about a lot of things. When I think about life and happiness, I think in terms a little bit of the health and wellness podcast that's also on the GSMC Podcast Network, but whereas that may tend more toward like exercise, physical, yeah. Life and happiness I see more as holistic, mental, spiritual, physical, all of those things that go into, what makes us happy, what makes you happy.
Sort of like self-care.
Yeah, self-care. Self-care in terms of, but the whole picture.
Spiritual, emotional.
Mm-hmm. And really, how to live your best life.
Yes.
So that's kind of a nebulous concept, how to live your best life. That's going to be different for everyone. But we're going to just talk about some ways that people have done this, and maybe it'll work for you, maybe it won't work for you. But in my life, I like to have lots of options.
Yes, that's always nice.
Yes. So since this is our first episode, we can first, we can't get to know you, our listeners, because you're out there in the world somewhere, but we can at least let you know about ourselves a little bit. Staci, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So my name is Sarah, and if you are a listener of the GSMC Podcast Network, you've heard my voice on other podcasts. So I've been with the network since the beginning. I host the book review and the Bible study podcast most regularly, and then I fill in on some other shows. And now I am sitting with Staci for a while on a couple podcasts, and looking forward to having someone else to talk to during the podcast, because often it's just me.
So lonely.
I'm so lonely, although I do interview authors, which is nice. I am married. I have 2 chihuahuas and 3 bearded dragons. And yes, Chalupa Batman, Tallulah Cooper are the chihuahuas, and the dragons, all being named by my husband, are named after Pokemon characters.
Well, that actually makes perfect sense.
Squirtle, Charmander, Bulbasaur.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, and then I gave them middle names of spices, which is a very long story, because my husband used to joke that he was going to name we were talking about potential children's names once, and he was coming up with all sorts of crazy things and spices, and I said, why don't you just name the kid Coriander? And he was like, I love it, Coriander Michael.
Wow.
And Paprika Michelle.
I mean, you wouldn't have, call their name out on the recess and have like 4 kids turn towards you.
That's true. So, but I figured if I gave the dragons middle names, then he couldn't name our children after spices.
But he named your dragons after Pokemon, so he might just do it anyways.
He might. You just never know with husbands.
Never.
So that's a tiny little bit about me. I mean, obviously there's more than that, but you'll get more as we go on through the Life and Happiness podcast.
Yes. So a little bit about me. I am new to the GSMC Podcast Network. This is our first episode for Life and Happiness, but you will also hear me on the travel podcast and other podcasts as they come out. I am not married, don't have chihuahuas or baby dragons.
Oh, man.
Also don't have any thing at home named after anything strange or spices or things you can eat.
How can your life be happy? Ha, you see what I did there?
For me, it's often books and more books and going and looking for books and spending time at the library looking for books. But this is not the book review podcast, so we won't go into that too much.
But we probably will talk about books, though, because it just comes up. Staci and I both love books. We have, some might call it an unhealthy love of reading, but I don't think that there is such a thing.
Yeah, no.
But when we talk about pretty much anything, we can relate it back to books that we have read.
Absolutely.
So just be prepared for some book references. And you can just tune those out if that's not your thing. We are not here to judge. If books aren't your thing, well, we love you anyway. We might not be your best friend, but we love you anyway.
We might also pity you, but...
But you might pity us because, we don't love what you love. So life and happiness is different for everyone. I think that's what we're trying to say.
Yes.
So books obviously make us happy. I can read. When I was a kid, my mom used to kick me out of the house during the summer and make me at least read outside so that I was getting some fresh air and sunshine because I could happily lay on the couch all day.
My story is not as nice. I got my glasses because I would read in the car as my mother picked me up after school activities, and I didn't want to stop reading, but the sun was setting and she would tell me, you don't have enough light, and I'm like, yes I do, and she was right, of course, and so now need glasses.
Oh
sadly.
Wow, I've had glasses since second grade, but I don't think it was because of the reading. I hope not. I'm not going to blame the reading. I love you reading. I won't blame you. So in terms of other things that make you happy in life, what other things can you think of that make you happy?
I do also like music, but interestingly, music that is not in English.
Okay. Is there a reason for that?
It lets me sort of zone out, and I'm not feeling the need that I need to listen to the lyrics or try and understand the lyrics, but the melodies and beats can still be very similar, and it just sort of lets me relax and just not necessarily be calm, because often I'm dancing around like an idiot to them, but I don't have to think for them.
Sure. So how do you find music that's not in English that you like? I mean, often we hear things on the radio and that's how we find music, but how do you find music that you like?
So, I mean, a good amount of the music I listen to is actually K-pop, and I've been into that for a few years, and I just follow different K-pop sites which talk about the latest releases in K-pop, but also I now use music sources like Pandora, and I just take all the quote-unquote foreign stations and I just put them all together and I put it on shuffle.
Fun. For our listeners who may not be familiar with K-pop, can you tell them what that means?
Yes, so K-pop is short for Korean pop, and it is essentially what it sounds like. It's Korean pop music, or what's popular there, but it's not necessarily pop the way American pop is. It sounds a little different because Korea is mixing American sounding music with European sounding music with their own sort of sound. For example, Korea has a genre we don't have here called trot, which is an interesting genre. Not typically popular with the young people, but it does come in sometimes in K-pop songs. You can hear the influences. But also it's, with Korea's history, it's a bit of a smorgasbord of things, but with their own flavor. And of course, with the language, there is actually a good amount of English in most K-pop songs, I would say, have at least some English in them. But even with the parts that don't have English, they're really good at like the earworms and hooks, that the songs that get stuck in your head to the point that you're not sure if you liked it to begin with, or you've just heard it so much and repeat on your head that you're like, now I just love this. They're amazingly good at that.
How does that work when you have an earworm stuck in your head that's not in English or not in words that you can understand? How do you just sing made up words?
I do. I totally sing what I think I hear, but I do that even with English songs, like with old R&B songs where they didn't have the lyrics out at the time. And so you just sort of heard what you thought you said, and it doesn't make sense when you actually like write it down and see what you wrote, but you sing what you hear.
For instance, as a kid, my parents had a okay, I'm going to digress. Just give me a minute. We're going to take a break here in a second, but I'm going to actually, you know what? We're going to take our break, and when we come back, I'll tell you a really random music story.
All right.
So you are listening to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast, and we will be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. Before the break, Staci and I were talking about things that make us happy, and Staci was talking about music, and then I decided I was going to go on a random tangent because that's what I do sometimes. And so mine is about misheard lyrics.
Yes.
And my dad loves music, and so I have I'm sometimes a bit of an old soul when it comes to music because I grew up with Buddy Holly and the Beatles and all the things that he loved. We had every iteration of music players in our house, from vinyl to 8-track to reel-to-reel. We had a reel-to-reel.
Did you have a gramophone?
Sadly, no, because that was that was before my dad's time.
Okay.
So I guess we had every iteration that
of
was
his
popular
life
during his younger years. Anyway, so we had Simon and Garfunkel on vinyl, and the song "Sound of Silence." There's a line in there that's "Silence like a cancer grows," which my child's brain said "silence like a casserole." I sang that for years because it made sense to me. Casseroles don't say anything, right? So "Silence like a casserole." I still sing that in my head when I hear that song by Simon and Garfunkel.
That kind of almost makes more sense than "Silence like a cancer grows."
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, that didn't make any sense to me. So casseroles really don't say anything.
No. So, Sarah, besides music and casseroles and misheard lyrics, what else makes you happy?
Well, I was trying to think of, for a lot of people, it's physical activity that gives them the endorphins. I sometimes joke that exercise endorphins are a myth, which I know they're not, but I'm not one of those hardcore, like marathon runners or someone like that. I'm more into things like yoga, walking. I like walking. I like listening to audiobooks while I walk, which is a good way to get in a book and some physical activity.
2 for 1.
Yep. And for me, yoga is helpful because I do struggle some with anxiety and depression in my life. And I've been open about this on the other podcasts that I talk about or that I host. And I do take antidepressants, but the walking helps and the yoga helps. Sometimes when I'm feeling stressed, I just lie in child's position for yoga, which it's not quite the fetal position, but it kind of helps put me in that little curved in ball. And it also stretches out my hip flexors, which is nice.
Yes, especially with all the sitting that we do in modern life.
Yes. So for me, it can be hard because when I'm in the throes of the depression or the anxiety, I don't want to do the physical activity. My brain says, get out there and do something, you'll feel better. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of my brain says, no, let's go sleep.
Yes.
So how about you? Are there physical activities that you enjoy or...
Well, I too also think the whole endorphin thing is a myth, or just requires you getting over a certain threshold that's a little higher than I like. Just a little longer, I guess maybe I should say. It just takes a little too long to get there for me to make it a regular habit. But at the same time, I do recognize when I haven't done any physical activity for a while, and then I do it, I'm not sure it's endorphins, but I do notice a much better feeling once I actually do get back into physical activity. And my body's like, I was trying to tell you, you needed to be doing this and you wouldn't listen. And now don't you feel much better? And I'm like, yes, but couldn't there be an easier way to do this? Mm-hmm. So I like walking also because my music. But I also, not yoga per se, but just stretching. Mm-hmm. And it always amazes me because I don't feel too unflexible in my everyday life. But then when I do get a really good stretching workout in, it's just like, wow, I haven't used that muscle in forever, and I didn't know that muscle did that, and I didn't know this was as tight as I thought it was. You really feel almost in a new body at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our bodies are amazing, really. I mean, we complain about them. We want them to do things that they aren't necessarily ready for, but when you really think about your body as a whole and how it works together with just all of the systems, and then how your physical body works with your emotional and mental state of mind. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I didn't grow up really loving science, but I am fascinated by the human body and how everything works together.
Yes, and it's much more all connected, I think, than some people might think. That you think, oh, I just have to do this, and it's just the body, but the body's only physical and not necessarily connected to your emotional well-being. But there is actually a whole bunch of connection between physical and non-physical that affects your health.
Mm-hmm. And I think some cultures are better at recognizing that than others. In Western society, we don't always recognize that there are those connections. And so one of the things that we might explore in this podcast is really things that might sound a little weird, but they work for some people. There's lots of things that people might hear about and think, that can't possibly be a real thing.
Yes.
But some people swear by it. We're not here, like I said, we're not here to judge, but we are here to give you options. For instance, one strange thing that I have a friend who used to do was tapping.
Tap dancing, or
no? She would take her two fingers, her index and her middle finger, and she would tap in various patterns on her head.
Oh,
and it was very strange to witness, but she learned it somewhere. And whether it's a real thing in terms of pressure points, or whether it was more psychosomatic in that it calmed her down for some other reason, whatever it was, it worked for her when she was feeling anxious.
Nice. So, have you then discovered anything that you thought wouldn't work at first, or seems sort of silly, and then determined, oh wow,
that really did work? I'm trying to think of what it's called, and my brain is drawing a blank. I have a friend in Missoula who did. It wasn't acupuncture, it wasn't acupressure, but it was kind of in that line where different parts of your body correlate to different parts of your brain. And so he was able to, it was almost like fortune telling. Like, he was holding my wrist and he said, I feel like you've been in a car accident in the last 3 years.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah. And so it was a bit like fortune telling.
Yes.
Like, I trust him. He wasn't a charlatan. He wasn't trying to get anything from me. But so it was just, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it was called. But I went in because he was getting his practice off the ground and he needed people to come in for certain credentialing hours. And so I went in thinking, I'll see what this is about.
So it was something at least licensed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he'd had training and he'd gone through programs, and so he was licensed, and I wish I could remember what it was.
It wasn't reflexology?
It was along those lines, but that's not what it was called.
Was it a foreign sounding name also?
Probably, because I don't know.
It
could have been called Joe for all I can remember. It's terrible. I should have, had I known we were going to go down that avenue, I would have Facebooked him and said, "Hey, dude, what's that
thing?
you do called?" So, how about you? Have you tried anything that sounded weird but worked?
I have, actually, but I will tell you that after the break.
Ooh.
So stay tuned. You are listening to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. Before the break, we were talking about Sarah's non-charlatan friend and the interesting thing he did that we can't remember the name of.
We're just calling it Joe.
Joe in the non-charlatan way. For me, an interesting thing I found that I didn't think would work because it just sounded so silly was salt bath floating.
Oh.
That's probably also not what it's called, so we're going to call it Jane. But my sister actually gave this to me and my mother for a gift, and I knew that people bathe it in like the salt sea, and that was considered healthy, but the fact that you would go and get in this like little mini hot tub with Epsom salts just seemed really because I've had baths with Epsom salts, and it's nice if you've got, sore muscles, but I didn't think this could actually be, sort of detoxing or all those things you hear about. I was just like, no, that can't possibly be what's happening.
How much salt was involved?
It's a lot of salt. Like, you actually do float in the thing. It's not a deep pool, thankfully, but even with that, like, I had a hard time when I was trying to get out of it because you're just floating, and it's like I can't actually. It's hard to put my foot down and to leverage off and to get out of this pool. But it's also really, they warn you, at least at the place I went to, if you feel like you need to touch your face or something, use the washcloth, because there is so much salt, you will get it in your eye and it will sting like crazy.
Wow. So, and you noticed a difference afterwards?
I did. I felt almost invigorated afterwards. And I wasn't going in like having just done a workout or anything. We just did it on a really random day. I didn't think I did anything the day before. And it was just like, okay, this is a day we both works for our schedules. Let's just go and do this salt floating thing. And it was really nice. It's very relaxing. I think some people might have a hard time because the place I went to, at least, you're in this little like space pod thing. And I almost kind of half expected to like jet off at any moment and have like a countdown T-10 or whatever. But there's a way with a lot of them to shut the door, but that makes some people claustrophobic. So you don't have to shut the door if you don't want to, but it's nice to shut the door and then you're just floating in darkness. And so along with that, you also just have the time to think. Like, they give you, if you want, earplugs to keep the water out your ears. And so it's just, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, you're just there in your body as you float along.
And how long of a float did you have?
I had an hour. But for part of that, because this is a pool at a facility, they want you, shower, make sure you clean off and everything. So there was about probably 15 minutes on either end, which involved showering and then showering all the salt off and getting dressed and all that. But yeah, our time was for about an hour. And it was amazing. It felt so long that I actually thought they must have just forgotten us because we went first in the day. And so we were the first ones there. And I was like, maybe they just don't have an appointment after us. And so they don't remember that we're here and they're just letting us continue on. But the place I went to actually had a little sort of chime that went off when your time was up. But I was freaking out. I was like, did they leave? Did they forget us? Is there anyone else in the building? What's going on? It felt just so time stretched out, and it was very relaxing.
So that sounds similar to something that I've heard of but never tried. I don't think you are in saltwater, but I could be wrong, which is the sensory deprivation tanks that they have. And that, in terms of it being dark and you not hearing anything, although that sounds like it's so dark that you can't see literally your hand in front of your face and you can't hear anything, which actually could be really scary for certain people, but it's supposed to just help you to relax. And
is the sensory deprivation tanks also in water?
I think so. And you must be able to float, so I don't know.
Maybe they're the same thing with just different titles for different locations.
Maybe because they either have to give you a flotation device or find some other way. Maybe they're filled with Jell-O. I don't know.
Well, that would be a totally different experience.
Yes. So at any rate, I've heard of sensory deprivation tanks and the concept thereof, but I haven't actually looked into the specific details. And obviously I haven't tried it.
But I think they're probably, from just the title, sensory deprivation, operating on the same idea of just, getting away from the world, even just not thinking about anything and not feeling anything. Because even if you go and get a massage or whatever, you're kind of still reminded by the person massaging you, hey, there's the rest of this world out there, and then once this is over, you have to go pick up your kids, or you have to go home and clean the house, or what have you. Whereas with at least the saltwater float, you kind of forget that there's a world outside the tank. Like, even physically, it was just, there were times, because you're floating and it's hard to get leverage, I would bump into the sides and it would be like, oh wait, that's right, I'm in a physical place right now. I forgot about that.
So that makes me think, I wonder what people 100, 200 years ago would think of some of these, like a sensory deprivation tank, if they would think that that was absolutely crazy. But we spend so much time in front of screens these days that we almost need to just turn our brains off sometime, or make our brains work in a different way.
Right. And even if you're not in front of the screen, you have the alert on and you have the notifications on. So you never really feel unplugged, even if you're sleeping.
And a lot of people now need to have white noise or noise when they sleep, and so they leave the TV on, which there have been studies that blue glow from the TV can really disrupt your REM sleep. Yes. So we're not supposed to sleep with screens on, and if you suffer from insomnia, you're not supposed to look at your screen when you wake up, which is terrible for readers who have Kindles because I don't know what speaking of notifications, our computer just notified us of something being done. So that was what that was. See, we can't even escape here at the podcast. But yeah, so normally our episodes will have more of a specific focus, but we just wanted to introduce ourselves, and we hope that you will join us on we're going to do 2 episodes a week and talk about things that we either have worked for us or have worked for other people. We may even occasionally have some guests to talk about their experiences, but we just want to talk about ways to make your life better and happier in these crazy times of, craziness.
Yes, and to be the best you in your life that you can be.
Yeah, I think we get so busy sometimes that we forget that we need to take care of ourselves.
I definitely do.
Yeah, and I know that it's a definite problem. I'm not a man, so I can't speak for men, but most women I know definitely take on too much in their lives. So We hope you'll join us again next time for episode 2. This was episode 1 of the Life and Happiness podcast. You can find all of our podcasts. We have a whole GSMC podcast network at www.gsmcpodcast.com. And you can find almost any topic that you're interested in on the podcast network. You can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find us. And you can find us on social media. We would love to hear from you. What makes you happy? What have you found that has worked in your life to relieve stress, reduce anxiety, all of those things? You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, GSMC Life and Happiness. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us again next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Staci.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness podcast.